So I know whenever I make a video about Boomer Maher, you guys in the comments will always be like, nobody watches Boomer Maher. And I hear you, but I think that this is important to cover because this isn't just about him. I mean, it's partly about him and how incredibly out of touch he is. It's really next level. But not just him. It's about the protests. It's about the smearing of the people on the college campuses. It's about smearing students, so many of who are leading these protests on these college campuses that are Jewish themselves. And it's about the media overall. Because the two people that were on his panel on this show on Friday night agreed with everything he said, as you will see. Now, we don't need to go over the whole clip because honestly, it's kind of the same shit he always does. Anyone who has seen his show knows that despite the fact that he pretends like he somehow speaks for the normie and the regular person, he's a multimillionaire who's been rich for so long that he doesn't even know how out of touch he is. So many of his monologues will basically just be here. Basically, his whole show is talking about wokeness, crying about cancel culture, which is amazing considering the position he's taken on this. And pretending that somehow this rich white guy who lives in LA and has been famous and rich for decades has his finger on the pulse of the regular person. And who's gonna tell him otherwise? He only surrounds himself with other like-minded rich people who aren't gonna push back on anything he has to say. And he makes sure he never lets anybody on the left actually come on and talk, or anybody that disagrees with what he has to say. Just ask Glenn Greenwald. Which brings me to the next point, which is that he's such a fraud. Anybody who knows anything about him knows that he has not shut the ever-loving fuck up for years about cancel culture, people being fired from their jobs for their speech. In fact, he loves to bring on right-wingers who were like fired from their job and be like, oh my gosh, can you believe your speech was censored? But listen to this incredibly out of touch, classist, anti-free speech thing that he said in his monologue.
Last week, Google employees staged the sit-in to protest their company doing business with Israel. Their t-shirts said Googlers against genocide, but they could have just as well said, look at me, see me. And Google did see them to the door.
And his audience is cheering. How fucking
They
pathetic.
fired all 28 of them the next day. Yes, Cahonia Award coming to you guys next year.
So great. So great. Oh man, that was so embarrassing. That was so embarrassing. Scott Galloway, the professor on the panel, being like, yeah. Real emotional clap. Deep clap. Embarrassing. Guys, I just want you to really let that sink in. This is the same guy who never stops. In every single interview he ever does or any panel, he always finds a way to bring wokeness and cancel culture into it. So it's all free speech and anti-cancel culture, all up until it's some Google employees saying, hey, we don't really like that the company that we're working for and using our skills at is using the technology that we create to carry out genocide. And of course they got fired for it, because anytime you do anything that stands up to the status quo or the powerful, they come after you. Those Google employees were incredibly brave for what they did, and them getting fired from their job by a massive corporation is not what's insane here. What's insane here is them cheering it. And who are these losers that he's stacking his audience with? The type of people that would cheer people losing their jobs. Did he fill it with the board of Comcast? No, Bill. You don't get to be the I carry the mantle of free speech and cancel culture. My show is called Real Time. And bring on right-wing fringe grifters onto your show all the time to talk about how wokeness is out of control in corporations. All under the guise of your principled free speech stance. But then you do a whole ass monologue cheering the cracking of heads of college protesters who are protesting against genocide. You cheer Scott Galloway as he talks about how a professor, an Arab professor, should be fired because he criticized Israel. And yes, what Scott Galloway was talking about was the criticism of the state of Israel. He wasn't talking about Jewish people, but that's always what they do. These manipulative liars, every single one of them in the media, will lie and try to conflate Zionism and the state of Israel with Judaism and Jewishness as an identity. And they do it on purpose so that you can't criticize the state.
We made the mistake of hiring you, and you want to support Islamic Jihad or the Islamic Republic, then you know what? We made a mistake, and we should rectify that mistake. We pay these people. And if they are not taking the temperature down and they lack the critical thinking that they can't criticize a murderous autocracy, pretty simple, they should be fired.
And people cheered that. Can we please dispense with this fake idea that Bill Maher still has liberals in his audience? The fact that people were cheering the loss of jobs You don't get to pretend to know how to relate to the regular person, Lamau, and posture yourself as some anti-cancel culture warrior when you yourself and your whole audience is cheering the canceling of Google employees, working people. Your audience and you are cheering the firing of a professor because he criticized Israel and cheering the arrest, the brutal treatment of these college students because they're protesting against genocide. No. No one should allow any of these people to ever get to claim the free speech mantle again, ever. Also, don't let it go unnoticed how racist that comment was that Scott Galloway made. He's talking about an Arab professor that criticized Israel, and he was saying shit like he's praising Islamic Jihad. But of course, that went unnoticed on the biggest Islamophobic show that there is. But don't worry, guys. These boomers are in touch with the kids. Here's Don Lemon talking about how the kids don't know anything because of the TikToks.
It's for the most part, not all of them. These are kids that are out there and they're peaceful. A lot of them don't have the information needed because they're getting their news from TikTok and from the social media.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And they don't have the history
Right.
of what's going on.
I do find it amusing that these people are so out of touch they don't realize what boomer old farts they are. Ah, yes, these college kids don't know what they're talking about. They're just on the social medias. We really need to do, maybe if they knew what the adults knew, they wouldn't be spending so much of their time getting news from the Communist China Party. What do I see in common here? 3 pro-free speech, old farts that are all really wealthy and totally disconnected from reality and the experience of a regular working person, criticizing the Utes for being uninformed, who all would identify themselves as liberals, probably the Rave Dubin classical liberal routine, as they spout anti-free speech nonsense and right-wing talking points. Tick-tack a winner. Bill Maher needs to go outside and touch grass. I feel like if he understood how incredibly embarrassing and old fart and out of touch and elitist this entire panel was, he may still have said it because he's a broken record and hasn't updated his talking points in decades, but he might at least not be so smug about it and not be so obtuse that he's calling other people narcissistic. I'll leave you with this. It's an incredible clip from one of the best panels where journalist Glenn Greenwald called him out during one of his many Islamophobic rants about how actually Muslims and Arabs are just more inherently violent and have an inferior culture,
It's not our fault what came out. We didn't go into Egypt.
Well,
we wound up with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Going to Egypt, we were supporting and propping up Mubarak for 30 years, even as we were cheering for all the Tahrir Square demonstrators as though we were on their side. It was our government that kept Mubarak in power, just like we've done across the entire Muslim world. And it's amazing for you to say that, well, look at all these Muslims, the minute you give them a little bit of freedom, they go wild and they start being all violent. How can you be a citizen of the United States, the country that has generated more violence and militarism in the world over the last 5 or 6 decades, and say, look at those people over there, they are incredibly violent. We play a significant role in what has been happening in the Middle East because we've been interfering and dominating that region in order to have access to the oil.
I wasn't talking about violence. I was talking about theocracy. That doesn't happen here.
No, well, okay, that doesn't happen here, but at the same time,
yet.
Iran isn't invading lots of other countries and occupying them for a decade, nor are fundamentalist Muslim countries the way the United States is. So these things are interlinked because we are continuously interfering in that part of the world. And so to say...
It's all our fault?
It's not all our fault, but when you send your military for 6 straight decades into other countries to bomb them, kill their children and women and innocent men, prop up dictators, you take responsibility for your actions and say, to the extent that that region...
That religion goes back 1,000 years before our revolution, so I don't think we can take all the blame.
I don't think we should. I think we should take a lot of it. And there's lots of bodies and corpses that have been piled up in the name of Christianity and Judaism as well.
Not recently.
Have you heard of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza for the last 50 years, motivated in part by extremist views of Judaism, or the wars in Europe, or the fact that there were generals in the United States saying we have to go and invade and destroy Iraq, a country of 26 million people, because our God is bigger? Lots of religions, not just Islam, produce violence.
Well, if I could make one quick point about Egypt.
That silly liberal view that all religions are alike because it makes you feel good.
No, it makes you feel good to say our side is better than
No, it
people
makes
over
you
there.
feel good to put a crown on your head and say, I'm a good person. How do I prove that?
You get to ignore the responsibility that your own government has for the violence and instability in the world by saying, look, it's that primitive religion over there that's to blame.
All right.
Bro, that's one of my favorite takedown clips. That video is 10 years old. So Bill Maher has been using those same anti-Arab, anti-Muslim talking points for well over a decade. And maybe the reason for that is because he never allows dissenting voices. Despite all of his shtick on free speech and open debate, which we just saw in that video, he doesn't really believe at all. He doesn't like for his views to be challenged. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to find out that was the last time Glenn Greenwald was ever invited on that show. Because despite all of his claims of being free speech and open debate and anti-cancel culture, he does not like to have his views challenged. That's why his views haven't evolved or changed in decades. He only likes to have right-wingers on and people who are liberal or neoliberals or corporatists and other elites who will agree with his priors. And if you disagree or challenge anything he has to say, well, like Glenn Greenwald, you'll never be invited on again. Don't ever let him call himself pro-free speech again. Don't ever let him call himself anti-cancel culture again. Next time you see him whining about wokeness and cancel culture and what happened to free speech, remind him. Don't ever let him forget about the shit that he said in that episode.